And they were both there at the same time that Oliver became associated with the Methodists. And he was associated with the Methodists. There's no question about that. Gibson said, "I think it is absolutely certain that Mr. Cowdery, after his separation from the Mormons, never conversed on the subject with his most intimate friends, and never by word or act disclosed anything relating to the conception, development, or progress of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." And Lang makes a very similar statement. Now, as to whether Cowdery ever openly denounced Mormonism, let me say this to you. No man ever knew better than he how to keep one's own counsel. He would never allow any man to drag him into a conversation on the subject. He suffered a great deal of abuse here because of his association with Mormonism on that account. So it's interesting, it's a little difficult to believe that Oliver made a public statement about the church and that Lang and Gibson didn't hear about it. Unfortunately, we don't have any contemporary records to check for that time period. Then there's the story of Oliver bearing his testimony in a courtroom at a trial where he was one of the attorneys. Brigham Young said, Oliver came back into the, a gentleman in Michigan said to him when he was pleading law, "Mr. Cowdery, I see your name attached to the Book of Mormon. If you believe it to be true, why are you in Michigan?" "Do you believe this book?" "No, sir," replied Oliver Cowdery. "But your name is attached to it," the man said. And Oliver Cowdery replied, "There is my name attached to the book, and what I have said there, and what I have there said that I saw, I know that I saw, and belief has nothing to do with it, for knowledge has swallowed up the belief that I had in the work, since I know that it is true." He gave this testimony when he was pleading law in Michigan. And Brigham Young made that statement in 1855, 5 years after Oliver died. Then there was a man by the name of Charles Nelson who was on a mission in the Midwest and recorded that he talked to a gentleman by the name of Barrington who was present in the courtroom when Oliver bore his testimony. And this is discussed, I think, quite well in Early Mormon Documents, Volume 2. Starts on page 467. And Vogel gives Brigham Young's statement, one by George Q. Cannon, and then he gives several statements from Nielsen. And another one, Seymour B. Young. But when you get in and start reading all of these accounts, especially from Nielsen, there are quite a number of inconsistencies. Sometimes Michigan is named as the state where this took place. Sometimes it's Ohio. Illinois is also mentioned. And several of the dates and different details just don't match up very well. My inclination, I believe Vogel is right when he says this claim rests on less than satisfactory grounds. Certainly it's possible that it happened, but we can't tie it down to any specific time or place. So until something else comes up, I'm not inclined to use this. For example, I'm talking about Oliver Cowdery at Education Week and relating some inspirational experiences, and I'm not inclined to use this one because I don't think there's enough primary evidence for it. Now this is a claim that Dan Vogel makes. Let me read you his comment. Cowdery was far from being the dispassionate teacher-lawyer described here, and at least during this early period of his life, he was known to be unstable and given to obsessive and morbid thoughts. Also, like Harrison Whitmer, he had a history of visions prior to June of 1829. Considering his state of mind and visionary predisposition, his obsessive thoughts may have carried him to the point of delusion. At least this possibility must be taken into consideration when assessing his role as one of the witnesses. Was he unstable? I think it depends partly on how you define your terms. But Vogel takes a naturalistic approach and defines Oliver's religious feelings as obsessive and unrealistic. And I don't think we would define them that way at all. But I believe the best way to determine if he was unstable is to go look at the statements of people who knew him. And the record is really overwhelmingly positive in Oliver's favor. Let me give you a few examples here. This is from Ohio. Oliver led an exemplary life while he resided with us. Here's another one. Cowdery was an able lawyer, an agreeable, irreproachable gentleman. He was an able lawyer, a fine orator, and led a blameless life while residing in this city. His life was as pure and undefiled as that of the best of men. He was an able lawyer, a great advocate. His manners were easy and gentlemanly. He was polite, dignified, yet courteous. His addresses to the court and jury were characterized by a high order of oratory, with brilliant and forensic force. He was modest and reserved, never spoke ill of anyone, never complained. Mr. C. earned himself an enviable distinction at the bar of this place and of this judicial circuit as a sound and able lawyer. As a citizen, none could have been more esteemed. His honesty, integrity, and industry were worthy the imitation of all. These are all non-members making these statements. Generally people who knew him when he practiced law. The Wisconsin Argus described Oliver as a man of sterling integrity, sound and vigorous intellect, and every way worthy, honest, and capable. When he died in 1850, the local circuit court and bar honored him with the resolution, quote, "In the death of our friend and brother Oliver Cowdery, his profession has lost an accomplished member and the community a reliable and worthy citizen." Really, from every indication, you know, the people that talked about Oliver in Vermont, in New York, and in Ohio and Wisconsin gave reports that are quite the opposite of unstable. I'd like to conclude just by reading a couple of things. This is from his friend William Lang. He said, "I often expressed my objection to the frequent repetition of 'and it came to pass' to Mr. Cowdery, and said that a true scholar ought to have avoided that, which only provoked a smile from Cowdery. Joseph Smith was killed while Cowdery lived here. I well remember the effect upon his countenance when he read the news in my presence. He immediately took the paper over home to read to his wife. On his return to the office, we had a long conversation on the subject, and I was surprised to hear him speak with so much kindness of a man that had wronged him as Smith did." And this is a letter that Oliver wrote to his friend and brother-in-law, Phineas Young, which I think gives a fine conclusion. I have cherished a hope, and that one of my fondest, that I might leave such a character as those who might believe in my testimony after I should be called hence might do so not only for the sake of the truth, but might not blush for the private character of the man who bore that testimony, I have been sensitive on this subject, I admit, but I ought to be so. You would be, under the circumstances, had you stood in the presence of John with our departed brother Joseph to receive the lesser priesthood, and in the presence of Peter to receive the greater, and looked down through time and witnessed the effects these two must produce. You would feel what you have never felt, were wicked men conspiring to lessen the effects of your testimony on man after you should have gone to your long-sought rest.